Alright, so this is my book, How to Embroider Texture and Pattern, and it features 20 designs that really celebrate color, using lots of stitches and dimension to create depth within your piece here. Or as my publisher likes to say, celebrating pattern, color, and pop-up stitching. I took all the photos for this book, so this is one of my ones for the cover, and then the editing team that my publisher works with added some of these fun floral decorative elements in there as well too. And yes, those are my scissors. I love them. On the back of the book, you can kind of get another in-depth sneak peek at everything that's included. Kind of breaks down that it goes over like materials, the illustrations, well, I guess it's illustrated photos, I should say, and then the 20 projects, as well as 3 more samples of the projects in the book, and 2 reviews. The wonderful Robert Mahar from NBC's Making It and my friend Sarah Barnes of Bear and Bean both left some lovely reviews for the back of my book here. So let's dive on in. So we have our inside cover, all the good information about my publisher and who worked on the book. And then we have our table of contents here. And I love this because you get a really good in-depth look about what is included in this book. You see all of the projects and all of the information right over here. And you can really see everything at a glance, which is what I love. For this book, I tried to do a wide variety of projects. So you're going to have some desert, some beaches, some mountains, some more meadows. There's some more tropical landscapes, a little bit more fields over here. So a wide variety of projects, and they're all in order of skill level. So it starts more beginner friendly up here, works towards more intermediate, and then more advanced towards the bottom. And then over here we have our table of contents, and I really tried to break it down so you get all the materials and information you need. There's an introduction, materials, that talks about fabric hoops, transferring the pattern, thread, scissors, needles, knots, and a really extensive stitch glossary, which I will dive into in just a little bit here. And then we talk about all of our different projects. There's 20 different projects over here, which I'll show you that I really had a lot of fun with. I go super in-depth into detail on these, so you will feel supported throughout the whole process when you work on these. And then I talk about finishing your embroidery in the hoop. The patterns are in the back of the book. And then a little bit about me, and of course, index in case you need to look anything up as a reference. So here is a sweet little introduction I wrote that kind of talks about why I wanted to write this book about landscapes. And the reason I was really interested in this is because as a kid, I was fortunate to get to go on lots of road trips with my family, get to travel, and as an adult, I've got to travel quite a bit as well too, and I wanted to pull some inspiration from there. Along with that, my mom is the craftiest person I know. She helped me and my sisters try pretty much everything. Growing up, we did bobbin lace, paper mache, embroidery, all sorts of fun stuff. And I will say I tried embroidery as a kid, was not the biggest fan, but as an adult, I really love it. So this is a little bit to her as well too. And then over here we have 3 desert landscape photos, which are, these projects are in the book. And funnily enough, when I was pitching this book, I had originally pitched it as an idea of just desert landscapes. And when my publisher decided they wanted to move forward with this book, they said, let's expand that a little bit. So while you'll still get some fun desert landscapes in here, you also get other projects as well too. So for my book, we start off with materials prep, and I try to give you a lot of information in here so you really feel supported. You get your fabric information, and then I talk about using color and pattern for your fabric. As you'll notice, a lot of the projects in the book use a wide variety of pattern or colored fabrics, and that's because I think using white is a little boring. With colored fabrics and pattern fabrics, you get a lot of depth and dimension and movement that then gets added to your embroidery, and I thought that was just something really fun that I hope you'll explore as well too. And then I also talk about hoops to use for your project. I have some recommendations in here for different shapes, sizes, brands. but really just also good general information on what you should look for with an embroidery hoop. Then we talk about how to put your fabric in the hoop and what you should look for here. Hint, it should be drum tight. And then I talk about transferring the pattern. So I show a couple different ways to transfer your pattern here. First, we talk about the light box or window method. I usually use a window when I do this because I don't own a light box, but same principles. And then I also talk about using transfer paper here, which is usually my go-to for most projects. Afterwards, I talk about thread prep and how to pull your thread from the skein, what kind of thread we use for this book, and getting things ready here as well too. And also splitting the thread, how I like to do that. It kind of walks you through this so that your thread's not going to tangle and knot up. And then I talk about scissors, different types of scissors you can use, and different types of needles as well here. I do own all of these scissors. I have a fun collection, and these are just some of them. And then this is actually my needle book over here that usually looks very packed with all these needles on pretty much every page. And then we dive into threading the needle, how I do that, as well as making a knot at the end of your thread. I like to do what's called the quilter's knot, and it's a little funky at first, but as you can see, I really walk you through with step-by-step photos on how to make this knot here so you get a good solid knot at the end. And as I say, I walk you through, yes, I took all of these photos, so hopefully they all make good sense. And then along with knots, we talk about knotting the thread on the back of your project here. And I like to use what's called the slip knot, and that walks you through that here. Then we dive into our stitch glossary. So this is packed with so many different stitches you will see here, and they are step-by-step photos that really walk you through how to do it. So this covers the back stitch, the bullion knot, which is like a fun wiggly raised knot, and then we do the cast on stitch, which is kind of like a wiggly raised knot that wraps around itself a little bit. After the cast on stitch, we dive into the chain stitch, and then we start with the closed raised herringbone stitch, which makes this really beautiful leaf shape over here. After that, we talk about the colonial knot, which I actually really love. It's very similar to the French knot, which is also in this book, and you can kind of use them interchangeably. And then the couching stitch, which is another fun one here. We also have the Danish knot, which makes this fun triangular knot here. There's the detached buttonhole stitch, which is like a fun raised stitch. And then we have the detached chain or lazy daisy stitch over here. We also cover the drizzle stitch, which is another really fun raised 3D stitch. And then a couple variations on the fly stitch. So there's the closed fly stitch here, the connected fly stitch over here. Yep, more connected fly here. And then we talk about the French knot. Like I said, you can use the French knot or the colonial knot together. I think it depends on where you are. I feel like the colonial knot is much more East Coast and the French knot is much more West Coast, but you know, again, use what you like. And then the granitos stitch, which is just like a fun little, kind of like rounded stitch there. And then we start with the long and short satin stitch over here. Keep going and how to blend that together in a shape. And then the oyster stitch, which is another kind of fun loopy stitch. And then we have the padded satin stitch on how to make that. The pistol stitch, which I always like to think of as the French knot with a tail. And then the radial satin stitch, so kind of how to make that straight satin stitch around like a curved section. And then the reverse chain stitch over here, which I actually prefer to the chain stitch, but again, those are another interchangeable one you can use. The running stitch, the satin stitch, the seed stitch over here. Then we have the split back stitch, the stem stitch, the straight stitch, the tulip stitch, which goes on to the next page over here. Makes fun little like tulip shapes. We have turkey work, which gives you that really fun fringe-like texture. And then we have the weave stitch over here. We have the wheat ear stitch, which is kind of like a connected chain and fly stitch together. The whipped back stitch, which kind of makes it look a little bit like a candy cane, so very fun. And then the woven picot stitch over here, another really cool 3D stitch. And that is the last stitch in the stitch section, but as you can tell, it really covers tons of different stitches, really in depth with lots of information there, and tips along the way too. So then we dive into our projects, and there's 20 different projects in this book that really start from beginner friendly to more advanced. So the first project is the Joshua Tree project, and I actually have that embroidery over here, as you can see, same one there. But this project gives you a little bit about why I wanted to cover this project in the book, and details what you will need for this project. So with this one, you can see I used 2 different fabrics here. Both of those are mentioned in if you want to use that fabric there as well. And then I have an illustrated stitch diagram, so you can see it kind of breaks down in the image what color is used where, so you get a really good sense of that. And then we dive into the project itself. So I took a lot of step-by-step photos along the way so you can really see how this piece comes together. Like you start at the bottom with our long and short satin stitch, and then we move on to our second layer right here. We have our third layer over here, and then we add in our tree trunk. After our tree trunk, you'll start with this top landscape up here. Then we move into the leaves on our tree, and after that we add in our shrubs, and then you'll finish the hoop, which is on a different section in the back of the book, all of the finishing for this book. And then we move on to the next project. So again, another beginner-friendly project where the forest meets the beach. This one was inspired by visiting the Oregon coast and Cannon Beach, where they have like a fun beach that's really beautiful and sandy, but then you literally walk like a block over and there's like the forest and trees everywhere. So it feels very much where the forest meets the beach. This one is an oval hoop, and it walks you through exactly what's used for this project here, and again details all those good stitches that are included in here as well too. And again walks you through step by step how to do all of these different parts here. Something like this photo has all these different steps in here, but it's all the same stitch, and really kind of you get the gist of how it builds together. And then adding some texture with our tree branches, and then more with our sand over here, and then like the bubbly water next to the sand, and then our little moon in the sky. Then we move on to Mojave Hues, which is another desert piece that I really love. And again, there's 2 different fabrics with this, so it talks you through what fabrics are used there, breaks down all the different stitches and thread colors in this diagram here. That's also listed in the what you'll need for this project up here. And then we go into the stitching. So we have our 3D leaves, and we talk about the different layers for our landscape. So start at the bottom and kind of work your way up with this one. Then we move on to our back stitch, and then some more satin stitch, kind of just building our layers up here. More layers over here. And then a tip for working with etoile thread, which is kind of like a sparkly thread. And then moving on to more landscape layers, starting with our sky, adding the moon, more sky, and then kind of finishing it with a lovely outline there. Then we move on to the Hidden Beach Cove, and this one was inspired by a trip to Tulum, where you're kind of like walking along a path, and then it just breaks out and you see the ocean right through there. So it was a really fun experience. This one is a smaller 4-inch project, so it's a little bit of a quicker stitch, but I loved this fabric because it felt like kind of the wind blowing around in the sky. And then we use a lot of French knots here to add some fun, grassy texture, and then add some fronds and the little pop of ocean there. And again, this walks you through, so we start with our palm trees, then go to add our water and rocks, add our palm tree leaves, start in with our sand, add some greenery, more greenery, the rest of the greenery, and then we add in like our sea foam, our little shells, and more grassy bits on top of the other sand over there. And then we move on to one of the first projects I did for the book that wasn't a desert, Mountains at Sunset. This is very much Pacific Northwest vibes over here, but it has this really beautiful layered sunset right here, a couple different stitches in there, as well as different stitches to add texture within our mountains as well too. And with this one, I really wanted to stitch the entire thing so you don't have the fabric that adds that depth with it. You really have the stitches itself that build this landscape here. So with this one, we start at the top with our landscape, move down to filling in the distant mountains here, and then we have our snow caps and the rest of our like gray mountains over here, leaving space for our trees. Then we add in our trees and this lovely lush texture for our meadow. Then we move on to arches, which I will admit before writing this book I had not been to arches, but I did go last year, which I was very excited about, and it was so beautiful to see. Again, this one I loved the like waves in the fabric here. I felt like it really played with like wind blowing around and added some fun contrast to the more blocky texture of our landscape over here. With this one, there's lots of really small little pieces in here, so you'll find a number that is located with what section it is for that over here, as well as broken down in the section step-by-step section over here. As you can see, this one uses this really beautiful like wavy like fabric, whereas this one I did a fun tie-dye fabric, and it really kind of like radiates out from the center and makes it just really like a fun explosion. So another way to add different dimension with this project. But with this one, you kind of work in sections. So we do, you know, like all of that one thread and section at a time, then you move on to the next one, the next sections, and it kind of fills in like a little bit like a puzzle piece here until you get everything all put together. So that's kind of like a fun way to see this one come to life. And then we have Purple Mountains Majesty, which is another like mountain landscape, very reminiscent of kind of like the Pacific Northwest, Midwest area with our fields. And we have two different fabrics with this one as well too. So you'll see those come up, this like more creamy fabric, and then this fun purple dotted star fabric over here. But it walks you through building the mountains, starting with your grass, adding in another field over here, which is kind of for me reminiscent of like a wheat field, and then another meadow, which is used by using the detached chain or lazy daisy stitch to kind of fill in some fun textures, and then adding some beautiful flowers and shrubs on top to give it even more depth. And then we have a walk among the wildflowers, which is an intermediate project. And I have this sample right here. As you can see, it has some fun textures to it and uses lots of different fun colors and stitches. This project also uses two different fabrics. So we have this like peachy fabric on the top and the minty sparkly green below. And I walk you through how to layer your fabrics with this. So with this one, we can kind of see the detail of what's included in our project, the different fabrics here, and then we dive in. So it talks about like how to attach your fabric. As you can see, we kind of use the running stitch on there, and then putting your design on top here, and then starting to stitch. So that first layer is really going to kind of like cover up the top of that fabric there, and then removing the running stitch, adding the rest of our grassy landscape layers, and then we start in on our plants. So you get like the leaves, adding some flowers over here, adding even more fun flowers like forget-me-nots and these like fun like bunches of flowers here. And then we move on to even more over here, and these use kind of a variety of different stitches, so you really get a fun sampler with this project, using our long and short satin stitch. And then we have a little bit of turkey work to give you those like fluffy sections right there. And then that's kind of this project. Then we move on to Scenic Lookout, which is another intermediate project. And for this one, I have gone on a few road trips along the Pacific Northwest coast, and there's a lot of like roads, what do you call them? Like road stops or restrooms along the way, and some of them have really beautiful like scenic looks. I will be the first to admit I'm always the one who like has to stop at the bathroom. We make like 9 million trips along the way. So this is inspired by one of those like scenic lookouts that we saw along that trip there. And for this one, I actually ice dyed this fabric, so you get some fun marbling in there. But you can use really any fabric you want with this. Then the details of where everything is with this project, kind of coming over here, and how this project gets built. So kind of from the ground up, we start with our grass on the bottom, adding some more grass, more in this corner over here, and then we add in our first mountain. Then we move on to our snow caps, our second mountain, more snow caps, and then we add the snow drifts on the right. Then we start filling in this mountain over here, and with this one I wanted a slightly different texture than the other, so you can see this is a little smoother with our long and short, and this one is more of a rough, rugged texture, which is actually the seed stitch. And you can see it kind of works in gradients here, so darker, medium, and lightest up at the top. Then we add in our tree branches here, tree trunks, and then we add in our fun 3D leaves for our branches over here, which are really pop off the fabric and give it some fun depth, which I really love. Then we move on to another desert pattern here, and with this one you have a couple different fabrics to choose from, and really plays with more textures within this design as well. And as you can see, this one is in purple, but over here we have an orange background. So again, 2 different fabrics to choose from, starting with our sun, moving on to our barrel cactus, and then our organ pipe cacti, and then our agave, finishing up our agave over here with the other color. Then we move on to our cactus spines and the blooms at the top, and then we start filling in our landscape. So you have this back stitch over here, and then the seed stitch up here. And then this one was really inspired by visiting my mother-in-law in Arizona with all the beautiful cacti you see there. Then we move on to another Pacific Northwest design, which is beautiful Mount Vernon, which you can see from pretty much like driving in most directions, as well as when I walk up a hill in my neighborhood. So I have this piece right here, as you can see, same design, but it plays with some fun bright yellow pattern fabric, and then you get your beautiful mountain, and then the fabric actually peeks through a little bit with this bottom layer down here. And like with this fabric, it's a fun pattern, but it doesn't necessarily like give movement. It just adds some fun pattern background to it, which I really loved. But with this one, we get to dive into some other fun stitches and use another cool oval hoop here. So with this one, we start with our mountain, building that up here with a lot of satin stitch, and then we start filling in our green landscape layer, and then we move on to our flowers here, which is the Danish knot and then the tulip stitch there. And then this is another seed stitch, but unlike the last project where it's overlapping and really densely filled, you're going to see some space in there to get some more yellow popping through. And then we have our sun in the background as well. After that, we move on to what I call Mountain Brook, which it was inspired by like camping. I will admit I'm not a big camper, but the occasional times I go, we usually find some good spots. This one has 2 different fabric designs to choose from, so I always feel like this one feels a little more like nighttimey, even though it's like a burnt orange, yellow, butterscotchy color, because this feels more moon with the stars, and even though this one's like a purple, it feels a little more daytime to me, but maybe that's just me. And with this one, we really use a bunch of different stitches in here to build some fun textures with our landscapes as well. So as you can see, we start with the sun, then build up our mountains, working onto the other side of our mountains over here, then adding in some of our fields, our water, and we move on to the right side fields, adding in some more of those fields towards the bottom, and then adding in the little fun flowers and pieces along the top there to give it that fun pop of color and added dimension on top of our stitches. Then after that, we move on to From the Heartland, and this one was kind of inspired by driving through Montana, but also going to school. I went to school at WCU in Pullman, Washington, which you always drive through these like wheat fields on the way to school every year. So this was very reminiscent of that, as well as kind of like this road trip I went on from Seattle to Chicago. This one uses another fun like square hoop, so slightly different shape there, which gives it added depth and funness to it. And then we really start with building our landscape. So you're going to use the weave stitch over here to kind of make it really feel like a field. And then we use the reverse chain stitch, some back stitch, some more detached chain stitch, which I love using it like this to fill in. I think it just gives it like some really beautiful texture and like rows as well too, that feels like crop planting. And as you can see with this one here, I actually put in some numbers on this piece to help me remember where everything was going to be. This is just like a heat erasable pen. You can do that, you don't have to, but it just helped me when I was working on this project. And then we kind of build our different layers here, working up with some like couching, split back stitch, and satin stitch. And then after that, we get to add in a little bit on top of our meadow here, and then we add in the wheat. So there's 2 different kind of styles of wheat here. We have the wheat ear stitch, which felt very apropos for the wheat. But then we also build some more like detailed stalks, which uses the stem stitch, the bullion knot, and the detached chain or lazy daisy stitch there. So kind of building those in together. And I think combining these 2 really gives it added depth and dimension, so you get like a wider variety of wheat here. And then some long straight stitches to kind of add in additional depth and overlapping as well too. Then we move on to another desert project, and I think this is the first advanced one. Let's see, was this one advanced? No, this is intermediate. All right, so we move on to our first advanced project. It was all a mirage, and another desert project here. With this one, we used 2 different colors of fabric, as you can see, but it really again plays with more texture in this piece. And this one I kind of wanted a little floating in the hoop here, so it really feels like, is it there, is it not really there, you know how mirage is. But with this one, we build our prickly pear cactus with 2 different colors, and then we start on our barrel cactus, the yucca plant, add some little flowers to our yucca plant, and then this spirally sun, which isn't entirely filled in, to again give that like mirage like feeling of, oh, whoa, is it really here or not? And then filling in our landscape, more landscape, a little more landscape, adding our saguaro cacti, the saguaro distant cacti, and then filling in over here with our French nuts, and finally adding the detail to our barrel cacti with the spines and the turkey work on top. And And the reason you'll kind of see me bounce around in the project here with like starting in one section and then building the landscape and then going on back and adding more details on top is because that some of these stitches build on top of other ones. So if I had added the spines to this cactus before this landscape was filled in, it'd be so much harder to fill that in. So that's why I build in this way. Then we move on to another advanced project, which is Tropical Waterfall. And I have this here as well too. This has been a fan favorite from the book, and it was inspired by visiting Kauai, the island of Kauai, and just seeing those beautiful tropical waterfalls and all those plants that surround it. So with this one, again, it really breaks down what's included for the stitches. And then how to get going. So we have our ruffled fan palm, and then we have more plants in the background. And with these ones, you kind of fill them in and then stitch on top, which is why this is another reason it's a more advanced project, because you add layers to this. And then with this one, we kind of fill in this outline here. And then the reason we do that first is because some of these overlap a little bit to fill in with this plant here. Then we move on to this banana palm over here, and the two different colors and the stems. And then we have our fan palms over here, which are some of my favorite. And then we start filling in that rock face there inside those outline lines here. You start filling that in. And then we start with our waterfall. So with this one, it's really just like a blending of lots of different colors with the long and short satin stitch. So kind of starting at the top there, and this color is also at the bottom. And then we really just build in there, adding some of the darker lines, and then keep on going as you fill it out in there, and then adding that like splash of water with our French knots at the bottom. All right, and then we move on to a walk along the English seaside. So I was fortunate enough to get to go to England a couple times in my youth. My dad traveled back and forth for work for a while, and I will admit we visited a lot of castles, but we did also get to see a little bit of the seaside too. So this was a standout for me. And with this one, there's two different fabrics in here. They're both kind of like yellowy. So this one feels like, you know, some fun clouds in the sky or sun up there speckled in. And this one kind of has like a slightly similar but different feel with the pattern. With this one, you use some more weave stitch, and then we use a bit of like the padded satin stitch to add some extra depth with these rocks and sections of our landscape up here. And then we move into like building our different background mountains, and then our water, filling in more of the water, and then we add like the foam here. And this is like a blend of, sorry, this is a variegated thread, so it's not blended, but variegated, so it gives you that fun blended variegated look. And then we move on to our grass blades on top, and then flowers with some French knots and some bullion knots. And yeah, kind of just layers on top there to add that fun depth. And then we move on to valley views, which was kind of inspired by the Grand Canyon and also Monument Valley. Another advanced pattern. This one is one of those ones where you kind of like build piece by piece, a little bit like arches, so the numbers are on here instead of like lines pointing to things, just to make it a little easier. With this one, it's like kind of the valley at night, whereas with this one here, it's got more of a metallic rainbow fabric, so it could be like nighttime, sunset, early morning, whatever you feel like. But with this one, you can see I used a transfer paper here, and we start at the bottom building our layers. Then we add in our agave plant here, and then we move on to filling in a little more parts of it, and then we start adding some plants on top of our landscape here, and then we continue working on the rest of our landscape background, and then filling in kind of piece by piece based on the color that's stated there. Then we add our little oh, excuse me, flowers on top, and then some little bullion knots here to add some like grounding rocks for our plants so they don't feel like they're floating around. Then we move on to another one of my favorites from this book called Cenote Plunge. So again, when I was in Tulum, I learned about these things called cenotes, which are essentially like holes in the ground that you can go swimming in. And this one, I have the hoop here, you can see it actually has kind of like a layered effect. So you stitch on top of tulle, and then the background is like a layered couple layers of fabric. These are two different ones here. You can see there's different fabrics in the background there. But you really get a different layered look to kind of like add that depth. Even though it's just like from the front to the back of the hoop, it really feels like you're almost plunging into that water, which is what I wanted here. So stitching on tulle is a little funky, but it's not as hard as you probably think it's going to be. It is more of an advanced stitch with this book, just because if you haven't embroidered before, I wouldn't recommend starting here, but I think once you get going, it'll feel easier than you think it is. But with this one, we first talk about how to kind of create those like fabric layers that will go in the back here. And for this one, you can use whatever fun fabrics you want. I used like 3 different pattern fabrics that go from light to dark, so it really feels like you're diving into the water even more. And then when I stitch on tulle, I like to use a transfer pattern here. So this is what it looked like before, and this is it on top of the tulle. So it really feels like you're kind of following a coloring book almost. And then we start filling in. So we add our ficus leaves, our agave plant, then we move on to the ferns over here, added some more details with those ferns and some tips for making the whipped back stitch on here. And then we'll move over to this palm leaf, our philodendron plants, outlining in stems on those philodendrons, and then adding a little bit more depth and dimension with our like 3D bullion knots here. And I also talk about working along the back a little bit, so you're not going to see any weird funky jumps of thread, and tips for that. Same with like this other foliage, which is the cast on stitch, tips for how to start that, and then getting that going in there as well too, with your chain stitch and cast on. And then adding a little more detail with our agave plant over here, and then how to finish up the hoop and put in that backing. And then we move on to the flower field mountains. You might have noticed there's a lot of these fun speckled fabrics in here. I will admit I probably own this in like 10 different colors. Ruby Star makes it in so many, so it is almost like a fun like basic fabric to have, that adds just a little bit of speckled. So I highly recommend using that fabric if you find it in a color you love, or just getting it in all the colors. But again, this one breaks down where everything is, and this one is really filled with a lot of different textural depth within this piece here. So this one has the blue fabric, and then for this project I used more of a reddish pink fabric that has like these fun lines in the sky. But we talk about like building our landscape in the mountains in the back, then starting on our grassy fields here. And then we move on to finishing up that other section, and as you can see, we fill in the section below it first and then add that one on top, and that's because these bullion knots stick out much further from the project, so you don't want to put those in before you do that. And then we move on to some flowers, so working with our long and short satin stitch here to fill those in. And then we add in some stems, some 3D leaves here. Then we add in some more leaves and flowers here. We fill in the flower centers with some fun turkey work. Then we add our little like rosebuds here, and then we fill in the background. And you might be thinking like, Melissa, normally you do all those like 3D textures last, and you add in the background first. Well, with this one, I wanted to make it easier to really identify where everything was and then fill in around it. And because these are kind of so raised and defined, it makes it a little easier, whereas if everything was like so flush, it might be easier to do it the other way. But that's why I did it this way. And then the last project in the book is Forest Foraging, which has some fun mushrooms and layers of tulle with different trees here, so you really get that depth that you build on. This one also uses a really cool triangular hoop, so I think that adds some really cool definition to it as well. And as you can see, lots of colors and stitches with this one, hence why it's another advanced project. So for this one, we start by stitching some of the trees in the background, adding some of those branches, and then we added a layer of tulle and stitch on top, and then we do that again, more tulle, stitching on top, and then as you can see, we kind of like cut that away there, tack it down, add in some of our landscape over here using my favorite way to do the detached chain / lazy daisy stitch, some bullion knots. And then for this one, we use the transfer paper to add in our mushrooms, just because they're like small little guys here, and you don't need a whole thing to go over everything. That's why there's just that little piece there. But we fill in our mushroom caps. Then we fill in the undersides of our mushrooms, adding in lots of really good detail here, adding our little dots to our mushrooms. And then we work on our grass. And this is like a bunch of layered straight stitches with a variety of colors that really kind of fills in, as you can see over here. It starts like showing you what that looks like and then how to build that over here. And then we add in some more grass, some flowers on top of our other grass, and then our drizzle stitch around the base of our mushrooms, and then a few little extra like flowers down here, but I suppose they could also be like little fungi if you wanted down there. And then after all of the projects, it walks you through how to finish your embroidery in the hoop. So I am a little bit of a purist with this and believe that you should not use glue for this part of the project. It's only thread. So it talks about trimming your fabric, how to use the running stitch to get that nicely tight, and then getting your felt ready for the back of the project. For me, I like to use a sawtooth hook on the back and then add in like a little tag. You could also embroider this as well too, but that helps it so that you can hang your project up when you're done, kind of like a picture frame. And then how to use the whip stitch here to finish that up. And then again, we have our projects in the back of the book. So the really good thing about this book is that there is a download link that will take you to all of these outline patterns here that you can download and resize as needed. Also in the book, it tells you what you need to resize this at. So if you maybe like got this from the library, you could go to the copier they have there and have it resized to a specific size if you want it the size that's in the book. However, you can do these in whatever size you want. You know, if you want this one as like a really fun 4-inch or an 8-inch project, it is totally up to you and how you want to do that. But all of the projects are in the back here with our just really simple outlines to get you going. The rest of them here. Here we go, a few more. I think we have one more page of patterns here. Yep, the last page of patterns as well too. And then we have a little bit about me, kind of like what I do outside of writing books, which you might have guessed is write other embroidery patterns, and I also teach lots of fun workshops. They're all nature embroidery related. And then we have an index that helps you kind of look up anything you want to find easily in the back of the book, whether it's like knots or types of stitches or projects themselves. All that good stuff is included in there as well too. So that is how to embroider texture and pattern. Thank you so much for diving in and taking a look with me.